entrepreneurship, startup, and beyond. Anil Balan is a co-founder of operating officer of Splendre Management Private Limited, a marketing tech startup at IIMK Live, a business incubator of IIMM Kozhikode, trying to revolutionize marketing by building an ecosystem for an affordable, hyperlocal customer engagement for small and medium retailers. He is also a co-founder of Last Mile Consultant Technology Solutions Private Limited, and has 28 plus years of IT experience and has traveled extensively across multiple geographies: Middle East, Saudi Arabia, Bahrain, Egypt, Australia, Malaysia, US, and UK, handling multiple IT projects. He was in US for more than 6 years before he traveled back to Bangalore. He was a business unit head at Tech Mahindra and Mahindra Group company, and worked with the HCL Group, Sonata Software, etc. in the past, with an overall experience of 3 decades in IT industry. He has been the plenary speaker in international conference and CXO CEO meets, director of Ferrosmith Engineering Consortium Calicut, executive committee member of KSSIA Kozhikode, member of Rotary Club Central, past president of Junior Chamber International Ferroc Metro City in 2015-16 in Calicut, vice president of Calicut Management Association in 2018-19. He was Honorable Secretary and convener of Entrepreneurship and IT Center of Excellence of Calicut Management Association. He is working closely with Kerala Startup Mission, KSUM Government of Kerala, CII, and TIE Kerala in transforming entrepreneurship and startup ecosystem in Malabar region. Being a rural area, he has been significantly contributed for transforming this area to a entrepreneurial development region. He acts as a mentor and advisor to few high growth startups in Malabar region. He possesses master's degree in computer applications from National Institute of Technology, NIT Raipur. We are very fortunate to have such a session from you, sir. We are extremely happy to have you with this session. I invite you to handle the session with great honor. Sir, please.
Thank you very much, Nitin. First of all, let me thank yourself and Mr. Padma Kumar for giving me an opportunity to interact and speak to people from Malabar region, specifically in a topic which is very close to my heart, working very closely with the entrepreneurship. And I'm sure, like, the session after lunch is going to be very difficult, right? So we see still the people or our friends are yet to join. But I know I got an opportunity to attend morning session, both by Shorin Jose and as well as by Dr. Shahid. So if you look at Mr. Shorin, he comes from a different background and spoke about projects implementation, gave some examples in terms of the industries which are pertaining to FMCG, primarily on the soap, and it gave a very good insight in terms of the opportunity and the way an institution should look at industry from a different perspective.
Yes.
And I was really thrilled by the outlook of Dr. Shahid. In fact, it was an eye-opener to all of us. Like, it was mind-boggling, and everybody listened to him with a pin-drop silence, because we were not, expecting a life post, our era. And the top and some of the points that you really quoted was really alarming. So what he said is, about 30 years of people, you are useless. No, don't worry about things. You are useless. Experience is a liability. I like that statement which is made by Dr. Shahid.
Yes, sir.
And a couple of points which he really touched upon was very critical. And the message that he gave was digital colonization, right? Which is that, India is going to be a digital colony, and something probably we as Indians and academicians and probably the front runners should look at very differently, right? And apart from that, another important point that clicked onto my mind was 85% learning is from outside, is what he came back and told us, right? So the students and the type of the next generation kids that we are trying to groom and nurture, they're going to get only 15% of the knowledge from the institutions, and the rest they are going to get it from outside, which is a very serious and probably a point that we all have to look at it from a very different perspective.
Yes, sir.
As far as I'm concerned, I come from a different background. I come from industry, having worked with multinationals all throughout last 3 decades. So I would give a different perspective altogether in terms of how we look at this particular region, right? And how we see that the ecosystem of today is gonna be helping the young minds, and how we as responsible probably persons can guide them and help them to probably reach their next phase of life. And I will be to some extent will be contradicting or probably challenging what Dr. Shahid said, but probably that's the future. What he spoke about was 2030 and 2050, and 2030 is where we are looking at the emergence of Industry 4.0 and the transformation that we're going to see with the emergence of AI and stuff and so on, which the technology is going to take it up. Very true. But what is that we are seeing today? And I'm sure, one thing which is very true, that if you look at long term, probably 20 years, 30 years down the line, there will be a lot of shift in terms of the entire thought process, but probably in a lesser period in time, right? Probably in next 10 years time, or probably next 15 years time, what is that we can contribute? And when he said that 80% of the jobs will be no more, or let me rephrase it, 80% of the current jobs will not be viable by 2030 is what the statement being made, right? So in that context, in that contrary, what I'm saying is, yeah, probably yes, the current jobs may not be relevant, but entrepreneurship is a way by which you can, and I think all of us have noted that there are a lot of change in the way the industries are working, where we see a transformation is happening, right? So the age or aging of organization to be a billion-dollar company is coming down. Like he spoke about Pokemon, which within 4 weeks of time became a billion-dollar company. So which means we have still an opportunity who are in the 40s or probably 50s like me to still become a unicorn in probably 5 to 10 years time, and still it's not so gloomy about us, right? So from that positive note, I'll start my session, and with all your permission, I would share my screen, and then I'll run through a couple of points, and I'll be more my discussion will be primarily more from industry specific and what I have experienced, right, in my life, along with interaction with a couple of youngsters, startups, and entrepreneurs, right? So let me share that. And, is it visible, Nitin?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. We can see.
Yes, sir, it's visible.
Okay, great. Fine, thank you. So the topic that we are, or probably I'm going to talk, and then we will probably debate a little bit, is how entrepreneurship is going to change the probably a decade going forward, right? And that I see is through a startup ecosystem, right? And we are going to talk about how the startup ecosystem is being built, in India primarily, across, then we will touch upon a little bit on global perspective, and then primarily into Kerala, and then how we as torch bearers can help it live very differently. So if you look at from an entrepreneur perspective, entrepreneurship is what? It is living your life like most people won't, which means that what my predecessor speakers like Dr. Shahid or Dr. Shireen said is changes are happening fast, right? And things can be done very differently. And while you are an entrepreneur, you live a different life. For what? So that you can spend your rest of the life in a very different kind, right? That's important point, which means like, again, I'll come back to an example where the previous speaker, Dr. Shai said, spoke about Tata Company, right? Tata Company took so much of ages of time to become a company of that repute. But then if you look at, compared to Tata, there were other IT companies which took a lesser point in time. But then when they take a lesser point in time, the type of challenges that they go through and the type of issues or probably the grit or probably the entire life cycle of getting there is pretty challenging, right? So, and that's where an entrepreneur, right? When we create an entrepreneur, we have to be very careful, or we have to be very mindful about what is that as an academicians, as an institution owners, we should be able to impart to the students. Now, an entrepreneur is an individual who can take a risk, right? It's not a hunky-dory, pathway, right? He's a person who starts with something new, very innovative, very different, which can change the entire paradigm, right? Entrepreneur is a person who owns and manages his own business, right? If you look at, the two examples that were compared, they were having only one vertical. With one vertical, they have managed to become a billion-dollar company or a unicorn, right? With a presence across the globe, beating up all the traditional businesses, right? So an entrepreneur, if you are trying to nurture an entrepreneur coming out of a college and giving those type of directions where he or she can change the entire, way of the industry, how the industry is looking at, right? That's not pretty easy. An entrepreneur is a person who makes innovations, and through the innovation, the entire production, the supply chain or the production line of produce, everything has to be very innovative. Until unless there is an innovation there is no way that you can do it. And if you do want to do it something pretty short, it has to have a lot of challenges, right? And when you're trying to do it on a short period in time, the challenges are huge, but then capability of an individual has to be immense as well, right? And that's where the challenge is. And if you remember, we all embrace Peter Drucker, right? The management guru. He's written a lot of books, and there are a lot of quotes which is very prominent from a management perspective. What Peter Drucker says is, an entrepreneur searches for change, responds to it, and exploits opportunity. Two words here very critical and important for us is change and exploits. During this pandemic also, we have seen quite a lot of entrepreneurs who try to create opportunities of the challenges that we are undergoing through. There are umpteen examples here in Kerala itself, where there are startups, there are young minds who have picked up certain areas and developed applications and services and products, which has given a very different, support for the entire, whether it is for an administration, whether it's for government, whether it's for healthcare, or whether it is for a social cause, the entire humanity, right? And that's possible. So an entrepreneur or a person who wants to get into entrepreneurship is a person who would like to make a change, right? And anything that we talk about, Elon Musk, a person who wants to change the way the entire travel is going to be there, right? So anybody you look at it, right, they have tried to make a complete 360-degree change from the traditional method that we have seen in the past, right? And that's very critical. And when you think from that perspective, right, is what we look at. Why is it pretty interesting at this point in time for a startup, right? And that's what, if you look at in the last 10 years, we are seeing that as one of the drivers, either in building the economy or in trying to build the critical job creation, right? I mean, if you look at traditionally, MSME was the only sector which used to create jobs. Now, everybody is relying on the startups. And we believe and say that the startups is going to create more jobs, because that's where the entire ecosystem within the country and within the Kerala and within the entire world is going forward to. And why is that possible? Because, the youth is behind it. And the young guys come with a high ambitious mindset, right? And they try to do it differently. We, as probably in our generation, or probably I'm pretty old now, but in your generation or in your previous generations, we go from on a traditional method. On a traditional method, we will go, we build a company and we do that. But they would question that. They'll come back and ask, why are you doing the way you are doing it now? Why can't we do it differently, right? So that shows the ambition and the mindset of the youth, right? And so they are ready to take up challenges. They are ready to take up the risk. They are ready to look at differently what is being done today. And that's where we are seeing this disruption. In any industry you talk about, we are seeing disruptions. And that's where, one of the statements which again Dr. Shahid said was, either you Uberize or you get Kodak. Very true. The example of Kodak is very known to us, right? But so the mindset of change, the ambition to grow big, the ability, the appetite to take risk is pretty high with the current generation. And India being the country where you have the maximum number of youths, the possibility of us getting into the fast track is pretty high. So that's one reason why I'm saying so is startups is the way by which we can, probably with the boost and sort of support that we can give the youth today, they can be streamlined into the path of growth. Second point, right? If you look at the entire economy is drifting and changing, right? Traditional economical methods have gone purely algorithm-based economy, and there are multiple examples within the startup who are doing it very differently, right? Couple of which I can talk about very straight away is, neo-banking, right? So again, a startup from in Kerala, which is Open Money, from Kerala, they started a banking system which is challenging and doing it very differently. And they have already raised Series B, about $35 million, right? Even without generating a revenue, and they're looking at $100 million in probably in a quarter's time. And it's run by youth. Everybody, the average age group is about 31, right? And they had a team of about 300 people. So what they're trying to do is they're trying to do a completely disruption of the current banking system, right? Because what they feel is, and what they say is a traditional way of banking where the bankers don't look at the customer preferences, right? So earlier it was driven by the industry. So what industry says, you as a consumer will have to listen and obey, right? So, you all will echo with me saying that, there are instances where you will have to wait for a product to be launched, right? Today's generation, they cannot wait for a launch, right? They want it immediately. A very good example is, telephone, companies. Most of us would have experienced that we had to wait for an STD connection. We had to wait, book for STD calls to be made. From there, we have, and also, you know, when you want to get a landline connection, right, there were months of wait time. Today, you look at it, you buy a SIM card, and they will come back and tell you that, you know, it will get activated in 24 hours. And the question that you ask is, why would it take 24 hours? Why not I get it in, you know, a couple of hours? So, you know, so fast is the thought process. And so what I'm saying is, now the economy has changed to algorithmic economy, right? So the old banking systems, the old method of computation, all has changed. And today we're talking about gig economy, where you're talking about sharing, you know, the expertise that you would have. And that's happening even in our education and in EdTech, right? So that's the second number point. Third, and it was also very well rightly pointed out that generation of ours were more of, you know, making our earnings to be in a safer hands. But the coming generation, they're not worried about that, right? They have got a high disposable income on their hand. So if you look at it, you know, for giving an example, my dad looked at, you know, how he can build a house so that at least, you know, so his entire life was to build a house. Right? In my generation, what we have done is, yeah, we have got multiple houses, right? Now we are looking at a better living. Now the next generation is saying that why we don't need a house, we have everything, no, what more, right? So that's where the disposable income is pretty high, and the preferences of the consumers are very different kind. Like I said, the consumers today have got multiple opportunities in front of them to choose from, right? And he again rightly said that sooner you will be looking at a house where the taste of 4 people in a house is different, and all 4 of them can buy a meal from 4 different vendors using a social media e-commerce platform. And that's where we are reaching to an extent to that lifestyle. So startups are probably going to be the driving force in terms of bringing a change in a short term. In these startups, you can have multiple dimensions. You know, there are multiple different kinds of startups in different sectors and so on. But these 3 points, why I'm conveying or sharing with you is, this is where we see a change, where an entrepreneur with a startup mindset is going to be a deal maker or sort of a differentiator. Now, this is something that I want to give a perspective from a traditional business versus a startup perspective. So traditional business, to make a change, and very good example for that is the success of Paytm, right? And we know, all of us know that we are using Paytm or any sort of an UPI, and for that matter, Paytm is the biggest valuated company as of today. We'll talk about it a little later. But you know, Paytm, what Paytm did was not that something demonetization has helped Paytm. Paytm or the 197 team has been working on this banking solution for the last 7-8 years before hitting the demonetization. But when the demonetization was hit, Government of India came back and gave an opportunity to the entire financial institutions to come back and devise a mechanisms by which the larger masses can interact or transact with the bank in a much simpler and easiest and fastest method. Now, it was also given to SBI, which is one of the largest institutional banker in our case, right? Now, SBI, by the time they grouped up their board, the technical team, the entire looking at what solution can be built and putting together into drawing board and defining some outcome, Paytm has already on the ground with an UPI interface for interacting with the people, and so fast they could do it. Why? That's because of technology and innovation and the agility that the startups bring in. And white elephant like SBI, right, for making a change in the decision is very tough, right? Because they work with the traditional mindset, they have a traditional outlook, and if you want to bring, and we all know, right, even in our institution, if you want to bring about a change, right? Any change could be in the marking systems, or in the teaching methods, or in terms of assessment or evaluation methodologies. If you want to bring a change, it takes an immense challenge, right? Multiple barriers are there, right? So in a traditional business also, because they are not nimble, they are not agile, it takes a longer period of time. But in case of startup, right, with the technology, with the type of innovation, right, UPI was available, and UPI's interfaces from government, right? UPI is already available, but using UPI and transacting a financial solution didn't come from any of the institutional bankers when RBI came back with that particular problem. Paytm did it. So also rest of the startups did it. So what I'm trying to say is traditional businesses take a longer period in time, but startups, because of technology, innovation, agility, nimbleness, are able to do it much faster, much quicker, because they don't have barriers, they don't have hierarchies, they work very flat. That's one important point. Deep customer insights, right? With technology, what is enabling the startups is to get the pulse of their consumers, right? Whether it is demographic information, behavioral information, and rightly said, going forward, the cognitive and the behavioral element is going to be the key when we are thinking about the data being critical as we move forward in the years to come, right? So deep customer insights and the agility to respond to the customer need is much faster in a startup than the traditional business. And that's where in the automobile industry, while Tesla is trying to do innovations but much quicker and faster, the traditional automobile giants, right, whether it is Ford, whether it is Volkswagen, or the number of the old timers, for them to make a switch and gear changes is taking a longer time. Even though they are also working on EVs and innovations and stuff and so on, but it is taking time, whereas Tesla or anybody with the rear mile sites are doing it much faster, because what they try to look at is the behavioral aspects of the consumer. What is consumer looking forward to? What will make consumer happy? The metrics that they measure is the customer experience, the behavior, customer behavior, the response to the experience of the product which is being given to the customer. And with the technology, they are able to capture that much faster and easier way, right? So they get a deep customer insights. Traditional businesses, what they try to do was, they would look at a master-slave concept, right? From a product perspective, they will expect that the consumer is a slave and they have to buy the product, whatever they are manufacturing or whatever they are bringing into the market, right? They don't look at the customer insights. And whoever has not looked at customer insights in the long run has vanished from the industry. And if you look at today, the top 10 in the world, right, who are doing the top 10 in the Forbes or in the entire top list, is not any of the traditional businesses. It's all information technology companies, right? So what they do is they use the benefit of the customer data or insights. And traditional businesses, to attract capital in a traditional businesses, you will have to go through a route which is traditional, either through a banker, either through an IPO, either through a traditional way of raising funds. But if you're in case of startup, like my previous speaker said, there's an abundance of capital, and attracting the capital, if you have an innovative idea and if the idea is scalable, you can attract capital. So startups have got that benefit as well, right? And another important element is, like, again, this is the point which was touched upon, where old traditional business look at linear growth. You'll come back and say, I'll grow 10% year on year or 12% year on year, or anybody who does more than 20% is considered as the biggest, all right, game changer businesses. But we're in case of startups, we're talking about multiples, 10x, 20x, 30x. Startups have given 120x, 140x sort of returns. It is unimaginable in the traditional business, right? So what we are saying is startup is trying to change the world, right? And the youth that we have, the youngsters that we are having, they are taking the entrepreneurial route, using startups to make that change in the world. That is the differences that we are seeing in the current context as compared to our previous old timers, right? And this is a method of, I'll call it as a psychology of startup investing. And this I'm trying to compare with US or a developed nation to our country. So if you look at the right side, I'm talking about a redwood giant. A redwood giant, if you look at the characteristics of the tree would have a very giant base, right? So they will build on the base, expand it to the, and the strength is the base that they would have, and they'll go very steep on the top, right? And so is what you would look at and see, right? Any of those that we look at, whether it's an Amazon, the Google, the Airbnb, Twitter, Facebook, Uber, what they have done is they have created the base of consumer data as so humongous that it is very difficult to overpower or even, break through those, strength that they have created. All of this, the 6 that I'm talking about on the left side, right, are the giants built on consumer data, where they were, like Dr. Shahid said, the next generation or the next decade or the next revolution would be based upon the data that they have accumulated, right? But and so all the startups in US or in Europe, when you think about Europe, it's UK or Netherlands, Israel, Germany, all the startups come with that mindset because, they have to have user base, and any of the innovations, any of the changes, any of the inclusions are built on top of the data, right? Because that's where their dominance is. Now look at Indian perspective, right? India as a country, with the population that we have, there's a humongous number of problems that is available for the young entrepreneurs to provide a solution, right? The problems are immense. And that's why I say India is work in progress mode. We are not reached in a state where we can think about saying that, problem A has been solved. Even a single problem, if you can replicate in multiple states in India, you can be a unicorn, because that is a huge volume that we have, and the number of problems are pretty high. If you look at what I'm talking about is the travel industry, right? Whether you think about railways, you talk about roadways, you think about airways, any type of technology on that, there is a humongous opportunity for us to do it. And the problems are also as many available. Right side, the traffic that we're talking about, the population that we have, right? So anything that is related to your mobility, we can have, and so US might have a space only for one Uber. In our case, we can have at least minimum 5 Ubers and maximum of many. When I say Uber, I'm talking about the size of Uber, right? But there can be hundreds of Ubers in India and still be successful, because that is the magnitude of, opportunities that we have in India, right? So social and cultural changes in India are very strong. And that's where, capability of linguistic comes into picture. The number of languages that we have, and there are startups which have an opportunity to work multilingual, right? An app which would have done a very successful in North India would have to have a change when they want to look at South India, right? So the cultural change, social change, all that gives. So when I talk about social and cultural change, I'm also talking about the way the business is being done. Very simply, the type of business that our Kerala retailers or traders would do is very different from a retailer and trader that he will do in Bangalore as compared to Gujarat or Rajasthan or the UP. This type, even business is the same. The model is different. The process and methods are different. So we get a n number of opportunities, right? That's available for us in abundance. There is no constraint of demand, right? It's ample for us. And what I say is there are many white spaces, because it does not mean that you have one Baiju is sufficient for India. No, there is space for multiple Baijus, multiple academies, multiple type of educational edtechs, which is possible. There is so much of space available, right? So whether it is the transportation, healthcare, any sector that you want to look at it, right? There are umpteen number of opportunities available, and that's what India is very different and unique from the rest of the world. And that's where the opportunities in India, or the opportunities that we see in India for the youth, is much larger than anywhere else, right? Now, what I wanted to talk about was a little bit on the startup scenario in India, right? How the startups are looking at, where do we see the startup ecosystem, and and there are very good examples that we have in our mind, right? So if you look at left side, these are some of the startups who became unicorn. Unicorn is a startup which has got more than $1 billion US dollars as revenue, right? Now 11 unicorns were there in 2020. 2021 is talking about 32 unicorns already, which means, and this is India's story, it's not US story. There are many more in US and other European countries. We are talking about India, right? Which means all these organizations have got a valuation and revenue of more than $1 billion. And all these organizations are not traditional businesses. These are all startups which were either about a decade or less than a decade old, right? If you look at an example, let's look at Byju's as an example, right? So Ravindran, he started teaching, right, from a long period, right? He was passionate about it. He wants to teach the students, and then he took up that as a passion, and he started working on it. So he has been in this industry for probably the last 18-19 years, but then he tried to look at how it can be scaled and brought in technology, right? And that's where we see Byju's getting into the league right now as part of the unicorns, and we are very proud of it. But again, to be very sad that yesterday I was reading a newspaper, and the reports which come back about Byju's is they are running huge losses. And I think and that is something that is something I would like to even share and talk to all of you, that startups and entrepreneurship is not something which is hunky rosy picture that we can give it to the young minds, right? There's a huge challenge in case of Byju's itself, right? If you look at, I don't know how many of you have got an opportunity to read the news, it says that it has accumulated loss of about 421 crores loss in the last December, and so their loss has gone 30x times, which means they were having about 8 point some change crores loss a year before, but this time they have incurred about around 420 crores loss. And the more concerning of that to me was it's only 6% of the revenue is coming from the platform, from subscription of the students, right? 93% is coming from their sales of the hardware, the tabs and the other devices that they sell, which is again partnered with the HP. That is really alarming, which means the revenues are more coming from the hardware, not from the capabilities that they claim to be having it, right? So when you have a startup which is doing very good, we look at the positive element of it, and we don't look at the startups or the challenges that they are undergoing or the challenges that they have undergone to reach to that level, right? So that's where we as faculty members, the trainers, the teachers, or academicians will have to go back and tell to the younger minds that while there would be very good stories, and the good stories is only what reflects in the print and media, there are many stories which are not there, and it's not an easy path, and it's not a track where you walk and you get success very easily. It's not true. But we see huge opportunity in India. Like I said, because of the the points that I shared earlier, demographic dividend that we have, geographic dividend that we have, the scale that's possible and stuff and so on, right? So if you look at from a startup ecosystem perspective, it looks pretty enterprising, right? India story, right? So this is from our data. Now it talks about 41,000, but if you look at this is as of December 2020, I was looking at a DPIIT site, and what it says is we have already crossed 50,000 startups, which is recognized by DPIIT, right? This is about 5.5 lakhs jobs created by more than 50,000 startups, right? So startups is the way going forward in terms of how it can uplift or it can backfill the job loss that we are seeing from the rest of the industries, right? Again, reskilling is required, redesign is required, change in mindset is required, but then we are seeing a huge difference, right, from a startup ecosystem perspective. So the entire India story from a startup perspective is very, very enterprising, very, very soothing, and it gives a very positive vibes when you think about from a global perspective, right? So in this ecosystem, all of us, the educational institutions, the industry, the the traditional industry, the academicians, the associations, the industry bodies, all of these are collaboratively working towards building this ecosystem in a very efficient manner, right? So that's what the statistics from a startup perspective is what is there. Now, if you look at from a geographic perspective, there's another very interesting perspective that's being that we can see. Southern states has got higher, incubators and penetration of startups. One reason could be because Bangalore is considered as the hub from a startup ecosystem perspective, right? So, because of Bangalore, the entire the focus is shifted to southern, and in South India, whether it is Kerala, whether it is Karnataka, Tamil Nadu, Andhra, and now Telangana, Andhra Pradesh, all of the states, if you look at the education, right, from a learning perspective, right, literacy perspective, we have been little ahead from as compared to the north. I'm not saying that the north is not good, but we are little ahead of others, and probably that could be one of the reasons. And that is also being reflected in terms of the boosters for the startup ecosystem in India, right? So southern and western regions have maximum number of incubation centers, and incubation centers has given a larger boost to this ecosystem, right? So even if you look at like Kerala story, lot of educational institutions have got incubators within the college, right? So we within Kerala ecosystem, there are multiple methods by which we are trying to embrace the entrepreneurial mindset and the startup ecosystem, and we'll talk about it a little later, right? And now let's look at what are the key sectors that we are seeing, right, from a startup perspective in India. And the reason why I'm sharing this with you all is to get a perspective, right, in terms of what domain, what industry, where the ecosystem is trying to build, and where do we stand vis-a-vis the rest of the states or in a global mindset, right? So a couple of factors that we see is e-commerce. Look at the growth that we're seeing in e-commerce, 22% year on year, right? So, and all the startups are Indian startups, whether it's Flipkart, Snapdeal, ShopClues, right? All of them in the e-commerce, many more are there, right? So they are all seeing a huge growth in health tech, right? We are looking at a growth of about 28%. Traditional businesses, right? And in traditional businesses, in any industry, you will not see such type of growth, right? We are seeing those type of a growth. Fintech, 31% that you're seeing it, right? So the startups like Policy Bazaar is changing the entire, insurance sector altogether, right? So they are working from an industry disruption perspective. So whether it is e-commerce, health tech, fintech, edutech, making a larger change, because education is something that you need not have to be important, and probably this pandemic has given us a booster into it to embrace that it is not necessary for imparting knowledge physically, right? It's possible, right? While there are challenges, while there are probably we can say that efficiency probably is not as much as that you would love to have it in a face-to-face, but it is possible, right? And there can be methods that you can devise to address those particular challenges. But we are seeing the growth of each industry, tech, huge billion growth, travel, logistics, consumer services, all the sectors, the growth is humongous, and all the sectors are for the youngsters to grab. And some of the startups that I'm talking about here are the ones which have got acclamation, but there are n number of startups in Kozhikode, in Malabar, in our region, in Kerala, in each of the sectors who are doing wonders, right? But for them to catch up and come to a certain level, there are many hindrances, there are many challenges. And those challenges are that something probably I will highlight towards end in terms of an institution, education institution, how and what can we do it differently so that we give them a sort of a hand to grab this opportunity which is there in front of them, right? So these are some of the industries which is available, right? And for this, what are some of the major drivers, right? So we saw the sectors, there are 7-8 sectors, and not that sector specifically. What I'm talking about is those sectors where the growth are exponentially high, but any sector at this point in time is grabbed for scale, right? Because like I said earlier, the problems, the challenges that India has is pretty huge, and you don't have to copy any of the ideas or businesses from developed nations, because the problems that they would have will be very different kind, and you cannot apply that straight away to our business case. Our problems are very different kind, and our solutions have to be local. If the solutions are not local, probably we will not be able to see a success around it. So a couple of drivers that we see is the penetration, adoption of smartphone, right? The dramatic change that has been brought by telephony, right? The penetration of data, right, within the country, right? And the cost which is being there, right? That is humongous, right? What we are talking about is 490 plus million is the subscriptions or for it is expected by 22 in a year's time. And look at what that, and this effect is we are seeing it in our house itself, right? If you can think in a while, each of our house would have more than 3 to 4 telephones at this point in time. One, blessings of pandemic and COVID, because every kid has to be on any of the devices. But even not without this particular situation, every household is having multiple smartphones or handheld devices, or telephone connections or mobile connections or data connections, which means every house is now a place for an average 4 to 5 mobile connections, right? So look at the exposure of data that is available for the e-commerce or any of the technology companies who are looking at customer insights or customer behavior or customer using the customer data for providing the solution, right? So that's one important point that we see the benefit for the startups today, right? High penetration of smartphones and mobility, expanding domestic market, right? So earlier, market was confined to within a locality. Today, that doesn't makes any sense, right? You have an opportunity to go and sell across cities, multiple cities across the globe, right? So there is a huge opportunity to expand your market size, right? That's pretty high. Talent pool, right? Very high talent pool is available. And for the startups, guys, the funding today, like I said, capital is available. Where they talk about incubators, angel investors, venture capitalist funds are available. There are funds within Kerala government. There are funds with the government of central government stuff and so on. So there is no dearth of funds. Promising pro-entrepreneurship policies. A lot of policies, like you think about, Startup India, Make in India, all these policies that the government is bringing. So also in Kerala, the policies are pro-entrepreneurship, right? And it's a very good, inducive environment for the startup to grow and flourish. And that's what the reason that we are seeing it today. Now, if you look at this talks about the highest funded startups in India. 197 is Paytm, right? Byju's, Oyo, all of them. And look at the right side. These are the youngsters which are coming in. Cred, another one which is transforming the entire financial sector. So all of the startups are from India. Now, three major reasons why the startup scenario looks optimistic, right? Is one, because the rising confidence of investors, right? Because the capital is available for the startups. Second, the government is also encouraging with multiple projects and programs. Third, the technological advances that we are seeing in, like in Kerala itself, you look at what Kerala Startup Mission has done, right? They have got a lot of infrastructure, but there are disheartening or challenging facts also. 90% of the new startups fail, right? 75% venture capital backed startups fail after a period in time. Only 50% of businesses make to the 5th year. Of that, 33% of startups makes to the 10th year. Only 40% startups actually turn to the profit of the 33% that we're talking about. So look at the journey. The journey is not very hunky-dory. It's a high risk path, and there are not everybody who will be reaching into the finish line. That's what is very important, right? Now let's look at some of the positive elements. India, if you look at it, is the third largest ecosystem after US and China, right? And what the statistics shows is every day there are on an average 2 to 3 tech startups who are getting formed. That is phenomenal, right? That's a good story about it. And what we're looking at is the yearly growth of startups is in a tune of about 15 to 16%. So that particular growth is very positive for our youngsters, right? With a growth of about 13.8%, and total revenue or investment that India could bring in is in a tune of about $75 billion US. That's a huge positive for us. Now look at what we have done it in Kerala Startup Mission. Dr. Saji Gopinath, right, who comes from an academic background with a very good insight, with a long vision, he's put together Kerala Startup Mission with the thoughts and ideas, and what it has done for Kerala startup ecosystem is unbelievable, right? Fab labs have been created, one super fab lab across the cities for people to use, right? R&D centers available, grants are being given from Kerala Startup Mission, right? Whether it's 2 lakhs, 7 lakhs, 12 lakhs at different. And if you look at the report of Kerala Startup Mission, there are enormous, policies that have been created to handhold the youngsters, right? And if you look at the majority sector, it's IT and your education tech, right? So what is that we are talking about from an entrepreneurship? What I am saying is entrepreneurship education is a must in our institutions, right? We have to prepare for an uncertain future, right? Like we all have heard what Dr. Shahid said. The future is uncertain. There is unprecedented technological transformation that's happening, right? What today's students face is very different kind. A global market, change in the society, environmental issues are abundant, problems are humongous, right? And like what or my Dr. Shahid said, what jobs that they are going to get probably in by 2055 is very different kind, and they are not geared up for that type of a job. So we have to prepare our students for an uncertain future. Second point is only creativity and collaboration is going to work for them, right? And entrepreneurship encourages that. If you are not collaborative, if you are not aspirational, if you are not having an appetite to take a risk, if you don't have creativity, then you will not be an entrepreneur. You cannot create a successful entrepreneurship, right? So that's the point number 2. We will have to build creativity and instill collaboration with these students. Third important element is teach problem identification, right? If you identify a problem, then you can find a solution. But if you cannot identify the problem, there is no way that you can come with a solution, right? So what we need to do is we need to give them the real life problem, right? What is the problem that they can find out within our ecosystem, within our nearby community, within our society, within our persona, and how they can identify the problem is very key. And if they can identify the problem, then building a solution with the technology and rest of things is easy. So that is something that I would recommend, right? What we should do is to teach them to identify the problem. Fourth, what I would say is develop grit, because entrepreneurship or any building a startup is not easy. Highly demanding, high pressure, because you have to manage finance, you have to manage technology, you have to manage people, you have to manage interfaces. Raising a fund is not easy. Talking to investors is not easy. Making sure that your product is successful is not easy. Understanding the market is not easy. So until unless you have the failures, as an entrepreneur, you will have to go through failures. And that's what we are seeing in the society today, right? We are seeing so much of suicidal, so much of people who are giving away their life, right? Not able to face up the challenge. So if we can develop the grit among the youngsters in the mind to sustain, to have a persistence, to look at how differently we can, approach both success and failures, that is something that we will have to build in the minds of the youngsters. And finally, what we have to do, look at is tell them, this, you have to make a better world. This world is a better place to live, right? So, if you look at the youngsters, they talk among themselves. They are very hardwired. They look at a world at a different perspective, right? They look at from a different outlook perspective, the entire world than what we look at it. So tell them that, there are opportunities rather than giving them, the challenges. The challenges, of course, is going to be there, right? But if we can handle them and give those opportunities to them, that will make a difference. And as an academicians, as an institutions, as an organizations, we should be able to give those insights back to the community. With that, I will end, and I'm open for any type of questions that you would have, because I've interacted with a number of startups and entrepreneurs. And if there are any questions that we could do or we can implement within educational institutions, I'm open to. With that, I'll end within open for questions.
Thank you, sir. Thank you for the wonderful session. If any of the participants have questions, you can ask.
I understand that most of the education institutions have their own incubation centers and ESL, right? Where we groom startups. And
yes, sir. Yes.
Right. So the opportunity for internship, the opportunity to learn new technologies, all that is possible, whether it is an IMK. So if you look at from Kozhikode, there are multiple incubations available. IMK Live, Kerala Automation has got it, NIT has got it. There are KSIDC has got an incubation center in Highlight Mall in Calicut. So most of the government, NASCOM is having, TAI Kerala is having. So, there is a huge opportunities for any of the students that they would like to look at, pick it up and understand more. And I'm open to, please do share my number if needed to any of the startups or youngsters, and I'm open to help them all, right? With that, thank you very much. I appreciate for hearing me, and thank you very much.
Sir, we are extremely happy to have you for this session, and I appreciate your time management. And you have given more insight to the present possibilities and practical methods to nourish entrepreneurial skills among people and different aspects, particularly in Kerala. We are extremely happy to have you. I hereby express our sincere gratitude towards you on the behalf of entire mechanical engineering fraternity. I express our sincere gratitude towards your willingness to bless this occasion with your presentation. Thank you, sir. Thank you very much.
Thank you.